This episode of The Patrick Coffin Show brought to you by my invitation for you to join Coffin Nation. It's the world's largest online culture-building website, online community with tons of premium content, unique in the world, if not the visible galaxy. You also get awesome sauce, mugs, and other swag. Join us as we fight against the PC thought police. More and more of the show you're listening to right now, The Patrick Coffin Show, is being demonetized and shadow banned and censored by our superiors in Silicon Valley, big tech, and it's got to stop. So the doors to Coffin Nation are only open 3 times a year. The doors close Friday, March 29th at midnight. So go to coffinnation.com, check out the trailer, sign up, join us. You will not be sorry. Today's episode you're going to love because it hits something that's hiding in plain sight. Toxic femininity. We talk about toxic masculinity. We talk about the Antichrist. But what about the anti-Mary? What forms of toxic femininity have begun to take root like an idea virus in our culture? Dr. Carrie Gress, our guest this hour, has laid her hand on something extremely important. She has a new book, brand new in fact. It's called The Anti-Mary Exposed, Rescuing the Culture from Toxic Femininity. This is a blockbuster book. You will know her name if you've never heard of Dr. Carrie Gress, and she is on the show to talk about this and other things besides, starting about now. Dr. Carrie Gress has a doctorate in philosophy from the Catholic University of America, and she's written for probably the highest number of outlets before infinity: The Federalist, Catholic Report, The Stream. Her books have been translated into 9 languages, which is 8 more than my book. Her latest book is titled The Anti-Mary Exposed. Carrie Gress, so glad to have you on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Toxic femininity. There's just so much packed in that the concept there. Let me go kind of 10,000 feet above the tarmac. Where'd the idea for this book arise, and where'd you get this concept of toxic femininity as a phrase?
Yeah, well, the idea really came when I was working on my book, The Marian Option, and I was doing all this study on Our Lady, and I was looking at women in the culture today, and there was just nothing congruent between who it is Our Lady is and then who elite women are in the culture. Mm-hmm. And so, and I was also, of course, looking into the Antichrist, and looking at Jesus and Mary as new Adams, new Eves. There always was this, there's Adam and Eve, there's Jesus and Mary, but there didn't seem to be a female complement to the Antichrist. And so rather than pointing out one specific person like the Antichrist as an individual, it really struck me that we are living with a spirit of an anti-Mary that has affected our culture since the 1960s. So it's this female complement, it's a spirit, it's not an individual that's taken over the culture. So, fast forward 2 years later, and I was working on the title for this book, and actually Mallory Millett, who is the sister of Kate Millett, who's a very well-known feminist who wrote the book Sexual Politics. She was on the cover of Time. Mallory helped name that book years and years ago before her own conversion back to the faith. But Mallory helped me out with this book, and she's the one that came up with this idea of toxic femininity. And I think it really captured something that we keep being told about toxic masculinity, but in fact, there's something very toxic that has been presented in the culture to women as the way women are meant to be, at least since the 1960s. And that's really what the book gets at.
There was a Polish man who became a priest who in 1976 spoke at a Eucharistic Congress in Philadelphia. Then he was Archbishop Cardinal Karol Wojtyła, and he spoke very bluntly about the spirit and the presence, activity, pick your verb, of the Antichrist that had already kind of settled into the world. Yeah. You mentioned that we talk, freely about the Antichrist. Antichrist is prophesied in Scripture. It's always been part of the Catholic teaching. But because we have a Jesus because of a Mary, it makes sense that there would be an error surrounding what femininity is, even a virulent, you could say demonic spirit of anti-femininity. And you, in the book, you crank through all these, you just connect so many dots. Let's start with Lilith. You've got Lilith Fair, you've got Lilith Fund to help women to kill their babies through abortion. Who was Lilith, and where did the popularization or the mainstreamization of Lilith
Lilith came from. Lilith is actually a fascinating character in history. I hadn't really heard very much about her before. And what I ended up discovering was that the stories of Lilith actually predate our own scriptures. They're very, very ancient. And yet she just keeps cropping up over and over throughout history. Even the word lullaby comes from this Arabic word, keeping Lilith away. And Lilith was known for seducing men and killing children. That was really just why everybody was so afraid of her. And so it's fascinating then to look at what the feminist movement has really stood for. And there's not too far of a spread between what Lilith is all about and what they're embodying. And so, Lilith is definitely one of the characters. I've actually talked to an exorcist about it, and he said that the amazing thing about Lilith is that, demons don't have gender, they're genderless, but they will manifest themselves as men, except for the case of someone like Lilith, who actually switches and tricks people into thinking that it's actually a woman, when in fact, generally it acts like a man. So anyway, it's this fascinating dynamic of this very, very long history of this woman who's been engaged and, of course, is cropping up again. And I think that's one of the things that I really realized, is that so much of this has happened because of the fact that Christianity has collapsed in many ways. Women don't know these stories. We don't know the history of what happens, the warnings of paganism, why we should be avoiding these things, because it obviously leads to a place where no one's happy. And when we forget these stories, then, we have, in our hubris, I think women have thought, well, we're doing something new. Well, actually, they're doing something that's been done for millennia. There's nothing new about this. They're just embracing paganism, but under a different form and much more fashionably than in the past.
Seducing men and killing babies. If that's on your business card, you might not want to give them a call. Bishop Sheen, you mentioned on page 15, Bishop Sheen talked about the idea of woman as the standard bearer of civilization. Normally I don't like to read on the air, but this is it's so rich. Culture derives from woman, Bishop Sheen writes. For had she not taught her children to walk, the great spiritual values of the world would not have passed from generation to generation. After nourishing the substance of the body to which she gave birth, she then nourishes the child with the substance of her mind. As the guardian of the values of the spirit, as protectress of the mortality of the young, she preserves culture, which deals with purposes and ends, while man upholds civilization, which deals only with means. There's just so much in that one phrase. Do you know Kimberly Hahn?
I do know Kimberly.
Kimberly has a really great anecdote. I always like to give her credit. And it's about an argument between two middle schoolers who are playing, their brother and sister, and they're playing a game of pirate. And the boy says, boys are captains. I want to be the captain. She goes, I want to be the captain. I want to be the captain. Finally, after going back and forth, the mother overhears the girl say, okay, you be the captain. I'll be the captain's mother. Mic drop. So where's true power, right?
Yeah. And I think that's really at the heart of so much of the struggles that we have, is really, first of all, recognizing that the whole goal of feminism, second wave feminism, really is about power. And it's about, fundamentally, it has made our children and our husbands, it's made the family the enemy of what they're telling us the ultimate good of our life is, which is having a career and being successful out in the world. But in order to do that, we have to say our children are in the way of that and deny that most fundamental relationship. And even that the recognition that women really are, like Fulton Sheen, like you read, women are the soil of the culture. And when every gardener knows if you've got bad soil, you're not going to have a good garden. And I think that's a really incredible image to just help us understand the role that women play in a culture. And when you mess the women up, everybody goes with them.
My undergrad was very hard left, fully marinated in feminism. I learned all of the secondary magisterium, Elizabeth Schistler-Fiorenza, and Shulamith Firestone, and let's see, Susan Brown-Miller. You mentioned Kate Millett. Mary Daly. I went to a lecture by Mary Daly, rest her soul, who was a self-professed lesbian witch. And it was around Christmas time. And she led the lecture hall audience in a rousing chorus of, "Oh, come, let us ignore him." I have never heard more potty words in a public speech than Mary Daly. There's this marinating anger beneath all of it. And one thing I want to ask you about is the overlap between lesbianism and feminism. Which causes which, do you think?
Yeah. Well, I think actually, and this is one of the great sources I found was Phyllis Chesler has a new book that just came out, which is called Politically Incorrect Feminism. And she talks so much about all of these women having terrible relationships with their mothers. I think Kate Millett had struggles with her father, but every single one of these women, they call themselves the lost girls. I think the real issue is that they were incredibly broken women, and they were trying to find healing and just obviously looking in the wrong place. But I think that feminism starts first, especially when you look at someone like Gloria Steinem, who actually didn't turn to lesbianism until later. I think she prides herself on being open to everyone, being genderless.
Open borders.
And I think that's actually the goal. But there is something about it in terms of this notion where women it's this odd balance of women are both sort of crowned as the most important being, but at the same time, they want to be exactly like men. And so there's this weird balance that they can't reconcile because they're unreconcilable pieces. But I think that's one of the struggles too, is just, and men must feel this too, between we want to be just like men, but not that toxic masculinity part. Like, you have to change. So there's this another weird dynamic there too.
Could you say the toxic masculinity is another word for what used to be called masculinity?
It depends on who's saying it.
Because the men that I look up to as models, what I would say are a man's man, are not hyper machismo. They're not dominators. Right. They're not authoritarians. Right. They're authoritative. Right. They're courageous. They have guts. They are not afraid of combat, but they don't lord it over. They would take a bullet for their wife. They understand that Ephesians 5 has to start with the servant leadership of the husband. Otherwise, the whole thing doesn't work. And
if those are your terms, then I think you're right. I think that toxic masculinity does map onto that. I think it's anything that it goes against them. I think that this is one of the points of my book is there's so much irrationality in this, that it's so emotionally driven that you can't actually sometimes even just make sense of it. I think as outsiders we try to do that, but in the end, a lot of it just results in emotional bullying, or these women turning themselves into victims, which is another kind of emotional bullying. So it's really challenging to sort of pin them down on different things, because they don't want to be pinned down, because it's got to be emotionally driven and has a lot of propaganda with it and PR with it. So these terms don't really have to be defined well.
Sometimes the truth can be found in an unexpected place. I'm thinking of the big 90s anthem by the self-described feminist singer Paula Cole. Remember, Where Have All the Cowboys Gone?
Oh, yeah, vaguely. Right.
Yeah. It's. I'll put it. Just let me write a note to myself. I'll put a show link to the song, because she's basically longing for the time when men were men, when they were reliable, and John Wayne is kind of her icon of masculine reliability. So.
Yeah. No, I think that's the other interesting feature, is to look at how much has feminism led us to this place where men don't have to be men. And I talk about this too, this kind of trap that men are in, because they don't know how to respond to this. The bad men are like, this is working for me. I don't need you women to change. This is great. And good men are naturally opposed to fighting women. I mean, look at Adam and Eve. This is before the fall. Adam didn't want to fight Eve at all when she handed him that fruit. And so we see that piece as well. So I think my sense is men feel really tied up in this. How do we respond to this? And then when you see what happens just socially to people, and they're sort of bullied into behaving in certain ways by, a lot of the political issues that we're seeing, it's just an incredible struggle to figure out how it is that you are supposed to act like a man, especially when, it's this divorce is so rampant, fathers aren't in the homes anymore, and then you have schools also telling young men how it is that they're supposed to behave. So it's where are they going to learn how to be men? I think that's one of the things that women, and feminists in particular, haven't recognized, that they're creating this cycle of dysfunction that is incredibly hard to get out of unless we start looking at ordered manhood and ordered womanhood again.
I don't know what third wave feminism is, or even if it's a thing, but it sounds like when I read about a lot of the pop singers, I want to say Lana Del Rey, Miley Cyrus, that crew that identifies pansexual. So they've moved from identifying themselves as superior to or not in need of men. It's always in relationship to men. Now they're utterly independent, like pathologically independent, where now we're into sex robots. And I just tweeted someone who identifies neither as male nor female, but as alien, had his nipples removed, wants to be called they. So now we're into the word soup about pronouns. It just sounds utterly chaotic and anarchic. Am I overplaying the card?
No, I don't think you are at all. And actually, in the book, I have a whole chapter on connecting this, what we're seeing now, and back to Our Lady of Fatima in 1917. She talks about the errors of Russia and how those will be spread. And I think when we think of the Soviet Union, we think of it largely in terms of a failed economy. But I think the piece that we've missed is really the recognition that what they were trying to do was tell us that human nature could be changed, that we could remove the family, that the state could control everything, and that people would be happy within that kind of environment. And that, of course, the Soviets, the Russians rejected it because it just didn't fit who their character was. It was, obviously an awful system. But we see this Marxist thread and this idea that human nature can be changed that started with second wave feminism. And now we're just seeing kind of the natural progression of it. This idea that if you can change us, women don't need men, we don't need children, we don't need a family, then all of this is just really what we're seeing now, and what you just described is the full flourishing of that. Like, why, if we don't have to have any association with motherhood, then all bets are off, and everything is sort of open to us because of this desire to change human nature that we have been living with culturally.
This goes to the refusal to make distinctions, doesn't it? If you're going to have a communist state in the economic sphere, it means that everyone is, at least on paper, utterly egalitarian. So you have the worker, the proletariat, who's going to rule the world. But then in the micro level, you have the destruction of the difference between men and women, and by implication, the destruction of marriage itself. You have this kind of creepy, occultic chant that was it that Mallory Millett walked into? Because that's quick sidebar intro. Kate Millett was insane, right? I mean that kind of clinically. She had profound mental problems, disturbances.
Yes.
So with that caveat.
Yeah, no, and this is there's 12 women at Kate Millett's apartment in New York City, and they're chanting this chant about how they want this revolution, and it's dripping with Marxist imagery and thought. But what they're ultimately chanting about is getting rid of the patriarchy. And how do we get rid of the patriarchy? We destroy monogamy, we promote eroticism, homosexuality, prostitution, you name it, and that's how they saw to destroy the patriarchy. And the scary thing is, of course, these 12 women actually succeeded. If you look at our culture now, all of these things that they were really striving for have in fact come to pass. And I think that's really the scary thing, is that if you start looking at the spirit of this anti-Mary, there hasn't really been anything to stop it. It just keeps, it's like the Nazis coming into France, the Maginot Line. Once you cross that line, they just kept going. And this is what's happened with second wave feminism, is we haven't had anything that has really put a stop to it or help people to see the problem behind it.
And you look at the double standard with which the culture at large, especially the media industrial complex culture, how they view women like Sarah Huckabee or Sarah Palin, Dana Lausch or Melania Trump, very regal, feminine women, strong in their way, but not that hard-edged, leather-faced, constantly ticked off. There's a big high contrast there.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think this is why, that's a short list, but how many more names could we add to it? Really not that many, because they have done a great job of sort of sucking out of the room any air that would have been given to those of us that don't agree with them, because they control all of these pieces. And that's what they don't like about them, is they can't control these women. So they have to manipulate footage and do whatever they can to sort of dismantle them in terms of the public's vision. or the way the public sees them.
And I notice biblical words and personages are co-opted and turned upside down. Start the list as you do in your book with Jezebel. A Jezebel was the ultimate, she was the whore who destroyed families and ruined men's lives. What happened to her? How did that get rebooted?
Yeah, now she's lauded. It's again, I think this, it's like Lilith, where these women are attached to a certain kind of vice, and they turn it into a virtue. They turn on its head. And I think that is probably what the definition of toxic femininity is taking feminine vices and turning them into a public virtue. So Jezebel is a perfect example of this, where, she was really highly problematic, and now she's lauded, and it's that feisty woman who is very powerful and has can do outrageous things, and all of that. There's a kind of, and now it's it's a website, and people just think it's very laudatory to call yourself a Jezebel.
Right.
So yeah, she's definitely one of them in the list, along with Lilith.
So all of that pathology or anger or like the undermining seductive quality gets rebranded and repurposed and then packaged and almost like Jezebel is now a corporate entity. Yeah.
No, I think that's exactly right.
And how about Madonna Louise? Is it Ciccone? I've never been clear on the pronunciation of Madonna's
We'll go with that.
surname.
Let's go with that.
Ciccone. Madonna took away at least 2 generations of Catholic preaching in which you can mention the word Madonna. People under 30 now have no idea who Madonna is. It's funny, isn't it? A household name, global phenom is now a has-been. But in her day, Madonna, she ruled the seas of culture and pop music. Yeah.
No, and she completely usurped the name of Our Lady, of course. And, her song, Like a Virgin, obviously popularized, sexualized a whole generation in a way that I think it was very groundbreaking. It hadn't been really discussed before. She was always about breaking boundaries. And then, of course, even in the Super Bowl halftime show that she did, I think it was back in like 2006, maybe it was later than that. But, she basically did a whole pagan rite during that, and was actually proud of talking about that. So these and Beyonce has followed suit. It's not just something that Madonna has done and we left it at that, but in fact we see it with Beyonce and other performers as well.
Madonna just kind of broke the ice, didn't she, for people?
She was
like
an icebreaker.
What's the African the twin god Yeye? I can never, these names are crazy.
As if I know.
Let's go with Ciccone. Yeye Ciccone.
There's so many pieces of mythology that are wrapped into this, and this was a specific one, this goddess that was connected with twins and human sacrifice and all of that. It always has all these sort of similar patterns that you can see everywhere, from Cali in India. It's a very common pagan pattern. We think of it probably most commonly when we think of Our Lady of Guadalupe and the Aztec religion and the Mayans, but it was definitely widespread, and this is just kind of part of the idol worship that happens with goddesses. There's a clear pattern there.
So many of them seem to be doing this. Ariana Grande, Rihanna. Remember that really creepy, I think it's just a bad, terrible pastoral misstep with this Met thing with Beyonce with a papal mitre on. Again, co-opting and kind of perverting something that means one thing and turning into another. Britney Spears, playing off the innocent Catholic schoolgirl who's got other things on her mind. It's I'm loath to think of myself as a conspiracy theorist, but the themes are so common, and it just seems like the main new premise.
Right. Well, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to have traction with the church. The church is probably if you look at who the happiest women are in the world, it's Catholic women. The research keeps showing that. And we should be able to attract women so easily because we have all of these pieces. And yet it's because of this kind of constant cultural battle that we have that we just can't get a foothold. I think that's part of our problem is we haven't done a good job of making ourselves culturally relevant. And we certainly have had plenty against us. I don't mean to make it sound like it's completely our fault. But at the same time, we're not really presenting a good alternative. And I think that's, part of what motivated this book is, we can look at all the bad, but let's look at who Our Lady was and why it is that she's been this model of Christian femininity for, century after century after century, and what it is about her that actually underpins who women are supposed to be and how we understand ourselves in Western culture. This idea that women are equal doesn't come from other faiths. It's definitely come because of who she is as a person.
People have to understand this, insiders or outsiders, that it's the highest teaching of the Catholic Church that as far as human persons go, the tip-top highest in dignity and grandeur and worth is a woman, not a man. The Blessed Virgin Mary, the one who gave the word flesh. People, when they think of Christianity, they think Jesus, the cross, Calvary, the blood of Jesus. There's all these imagery of Jesus as the adult. Once in a while, you'll get like a crazy Catholic icon of Jesus in the temple. But then at Christmas time, we're brought back to square one. How did the word become flesh? Well, a Jewish teenager said the word yes to an angel. That's how it started. And Jesus didn't start as an infant, right? He didn't come down like Star Trek teleport. Started in the womb, as a blastocyst, as a zygote, as an embryo, as a fetus. All that continuity. And she did that.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the problem too, is that we think of her in very saccharine or one-dimensional terms. I think we've, as Catholics, have also shied away of talking about her because, let's face it, it's hard to talk about meekness when you're living in this culture that values empowerment. And so as a result, we don't really understand what meekness is. We don't understand even the notion of submission. And, the human mind, Aristotle made this clear centuries and centuries ago, millennia ago, that we go from one extreme to the other. And so when you're talking about feminism, people want to go one direction. And if you suggest the opposite, they'll say, oh, you think women should be doormats. And of course, that's not the case either. I mean, there's obviously this happy middle for a reason. And trying to help women understand that we don't have to be doormats in order to be wholly, healthy, and happy, fulfilled individuals is a difficult thing in today's culture. But I think Mary has these qualities that belong to the heart of every woman. And so I pulled a lot of those out. What do women want? We want to be known and we want to be loved. And that's what Our Lady had in spades, and the love of the Father. She knew that because she was pure. She didn't have sin to obstruct her view or to listen to lies of Satan. Women also want to do good. And this is one of the amazing things about, Rose McGowan this week is talking about why she had to have an abortion so that she could change the world. Well, she has an authentic desire to do good. She just doesn't know how to do the good. So this is another piece that Our Lady also, of course, offers us an incredible window into, that when we want to do the good, the way that we have to find that is through the Father's will, not through our own will. And then the third piece, of course, is beauty. And we all know how much women value beauty, how much it can be abused, both for vanity's sake or for manipulation or for, whatever reasons. But that is a desire of a woman's heart that I think that we also overlook, that it has a spiritual purpose for it. And Our Lady, invariably, whenever there's an apparition of her, people will say she was the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. And it's because she loved so much. And we can see that in someone like Mother Teresa. She's not a beautiful woman. And yet people will say she was so beautiful. Well, it was that love that was coming through. And that beauty is meant to be a way to get us to heaven. It's to attract people so they can see the beauty of God made flesh in us. And of course, we found many ways to use it for opposite reasons. But those three, the desires, I think, are really crucial to understanding who women are and what's motivating us, and why Our Lady is just this incredible model to follow.
I mentioned Paula Cole as an unlikely source of true human wisdom. Another one is comedian Chris Rock, who in one of his stand-up acts says that everyone's worried about men hating women. You know who really hates women? Women hate other women.
Women hate other women.
Talk about the false feminine desire to destroy an inferior, to backstab and gossip and so on. It's all part of this toxic. Is that one manifestation of toxic masculinity? And if so, what are some others?
One manifestation of toxic femininity?
Toxic femininity.
No, absolutely. I think that is certainly one where we're trying to destroy others through the vice of envy. Another one, an obvious one, would of course be opposition to life. And again, that breaking asunder of that relationship between mother and child, and seeing that is not something that's tender and precious and should be revered, and actually makes us better women. That's certainly another piece. Rage is another one. There's so much anger out there. That's one of the things that I think has made our dialoguing so difficult, and it's used in kind of a bullying fashion. Obviously, ambition is, ambition, and to the point where, you've got the sharp elbows and, don't let anybody get in my way, kind of attitude. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of different pieces that, you just have to look at who Our Lady was and what the opposite was, and you can see these. And it's funny, a friend of mine said, "Oh, my husband, I read your book, and he now sees the anti-Mary everywhere." Well, it's one of these things. I think once you see it, you can't unsee it. It sort of, jumps off the page at you that this is a real phenomenon that's been going on, and this deep corruption of womanhood.
Let me throw something at you, Carrie, and tell me yay or nay. I've been pondering the difference between men and women and the definitions of masculinity and femininity, and I've come up with two synonyms. My synonym for masculinity, if you boil everything down to one thing, it's initiation. And femininity would be receptivity. So not passivity.
Right. Yeah.
Am I in the right wheelhouse?
Yeah, I think so. I'd like to hear more about what you mean by initiation. But there's, in my book, I have this section that I use a lot of mythology. And one of the great definitions of womanhood in that is women as vessels. So this is why ships are named she, and ovens, and even the church. The church is the nave of a church. This again goes back to that idea of ship. So I think it is. So it's that notion, like you said, of receptivity. But it's not just receptivity. It's actually a holding of things and having the capacity to make them better or worse. And I love that notion when if you think about a mother, she holds everything about her children. A good mother holds everything about her children interiorly, and she's thinking about them, constantly, how to better and improve their lives, even as they grow up. And the bad mother does the opposite, and either kind of is manipulative or is neglectful, where she's not holding on to them properly or containing them properly. And I think that's what, good women do. And I should add too, of course, I think that all women are called to motherhood, spiritual motherhood or biological motherhood. I think that's another thing that we tend to, women say, well, I haven't had children. Well, no, we're still all called to these basic principles of containing other people and improving them through our own love, compassion, and tenderness. So anyway, but I'd love to hear.
Sure. What about initiation?
What you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by initiation is I don't mean that only men can start things. I mean that if you look at the fundamental mystery of marriage, read Ephesians 5, he's talking about sexual congress in marriage. And it's the man who initiates the sex act. It's the man who comes from without, a la God the Father who is above creation. And he enters, he produces as the first instigator, so to speak, of the beginnings of life. And the woman is it's not a receptacle. That would be to kind of thingify her, but she is the participant of receptivity. And together, what is initiated and what is received literally becomes incarnate in the person of the child. And so you look. If I walk outside my door right now, I'm going to look around and I'm going to see hundreds of things that were invented and designed by men primarily. And yet, everyone who's looking at them was brought into this world at great cost by a woman. So it's not about better or worse. It's mutual complementarity.
Sure. Well, and all of that is interesting to even think about, too, given the fact that boys have to be initiated into something in their teenage years, that they have to be sort of invited into their manhood, or their manhood has to be something that they come into. So it's interesting to think of initiation in that respect, too.
Yeah. That's a good play on that. I never thought about the play on words. If you read anything by Joseph Nicolosi in his early childhood, the very, on the natural level, the beginnings of same-sex attraction, if a boy is not initiated away from his mother,
Right.
where the spiritual
Right.
umbilical cord has to be snapped. He has to stand on his own in a way that's unique from girls. And of course, we've got these social structures that used to support masculinity, like the Boy Scouts, shooting clubs, bands. All those are slowly being chipped away.
Yeah.
Through
Without a doubt.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I think that's just even fascinating to consider. Why is it we're seeing this struggle of homosexuality so rampant in our church? It's so rampant in the culture. And, you can even see how if the woman doesn't see that she needs to separate herself from her son in a particular way and have her son create a healthy relationship with the father. And if she's overbearing and if she's separating herself from that man, you can see how incredibly easily it happens that a child would fall into that pattern. And, all the more so you can see why the admonition that, women, or the suggestion, I suppose is a better word, that women be submissive to their husbands, because part of that is, we all have examples of these women who are obnoxiously lording over their husbands and kind of dictating to them how their lives should be. And you can see how much that affects the young boy when he sees that rift and that pushing away of the father and seeing that that's not a good thing to be based on her response to him. So yeah, it's all connected, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. Well, this is why people need to get the book, which I can mention. It's called The Anti-Mary Exposed. I'm going to put a link in the show notes. I was kind of noting your artful feng shui in the background. Tell us a little bit, because it's your Catholic candles. I love, because they remind me of the Catholic beard balm. So here's the candles are all the rage now, but very few people have taken the time to marry the faith. And obviously, Christ is the light of the world. How can people get one?
Right. Then go to StellaMorrisandCompany.com to find them. But yeah, no, this is a new enterprise. I'd never made a candle before in my life, and the idea came to me. And I thought, this will be easy. We'll find a vendor. And we didn't find a vendor. And so we're making them ourselves. And
cool.
It's been an amazing project. It's been really fun to get these out there.
Better to light one candle than to curse the toxic femininity, as a wise man from China, I think, once
said. It definitely sounds like a proverb.
One example, let me hit you with something else. I think that one manifestation of toxic femininity is the ethos, the kind of environment in almost every Catholic parish in suburban America. The songs are feminine. They're very sentimental. They're kind of hard to sing. They're like Broadway ballads. The word wonderful is overused constantly. So much of the preaching is so soft and milquetoast, where the gospel is sociologized and psychologized and brought into an anecdote about what happened this week. And not a lot of it resonates with men, which helps explain why it's like 60-40, 70-30 women to men in church. Yeah.
No, I would agree with that entirely. I mean, that's a real problem that we have within the church. And I'm not sure how to solve that. I mean, obviously I've been focused on trying to help women understand this one piece. But I think that there's this misguided notion. And some of this could even be because women have been so outspoken and, I'm going to write the bishop a letter if you do this. And, it's just incredible how brutish women can be when it comes to priests and when it comes to the fact that they don't like what's happening at their parish. But men aren't going to do the same thing necessarily. I mean, I don't think we see the numbers of men, threatening, I'm going to write the bishop a letter if you don't preach. I don't know.
Right.
It's just an interesting thing to see what happens. And this is one of the reasons, I guess, why I think we are living under this soft matriarchy, because women kind of control the strings of priests and politicians and certainly Hollywood and the fashion industry and academia. So it's these kinds of angry women that are dictating a lot more than we realize.
Who was a lot of the names that were very, very famous from the early 60s on, like Germaine Greer, Helen Gurley Brown. Helen Gurley Brown, the foundress of Cosmo, to my mind, Cosmo is softcore porn. You can't see a cover of Cosmo, and now they sell them at eye levels for 5-year-olds. The word orgasm or hot or sex, it's all kind of soft bomb porn. And she's one of the architects of the notion that you can indeed have it all.
Right. Yeah. No, and I think a lot of them were. I mean, certainly Gloria Steinem was as well. But the fascinating thing is that Helen Gurley Brown, went to Playboy and said, "What are you doing? We're going to do this for women." She even got the same pack of writers, and obviously had no shame in even just making up stories about. Cosmo Girl. Sue Ellen Browder has talked about
Sue
this
Browder,
in her.
yeah, right.
Yeah. And Sue was telling me that, out of all of the things that they could talk about and make up and use for their stories about the Cosmo Girl, there were two things that the Cosmo Girl could not be. She could not be a mother, and she could not be a virgin. And so it's striking that those are the two the very two terms that we use to describe Our Lady, the Virgin Mother. And those are the exact things that a Cosmo Girl could not be. So you can see this trend of where women were being pushed all along from this second wave.
What are your thoughts on feminists who are now going off script, who are saying, "Look, trans women are not women, guys"?
Yeah. I mean, they're right, of course, but it's one of those things where it's like, well, why? We have to recognize this a long time ago. This is sort of all of the ideology behind this has led to trans women in the first place. So yeah, I think it's it's great that they're actually speaking up, but the problem that the cat's out of the bag. I think it's a little too late.
I feel like sometimes just preparing some popcorn and watching the left eat itself.
It's true.
Just get out of the way while they duke it out.
Yeah. Well, maybe that is the solution, is to just let them, to duke it out and let them demolish each other. But at the same time, we have to fill that void and fill the gap with something.
Carrie, when do you think all of the Pandora box lid began to shake and crash open? Mm-hmm. Do you draw a kind of a historical line? My own mental line is I think it was George Weigel, maybe Father Newhouse, who coined the phrase, the Great Truce of 68, where the Catholic bishops just entered into an unspoken alliance with the dissenter activists not to punish, not to discipline priests or other Catholics who dissented from Humanae Vitae. Because if you tamper with that fundamental link between love and life and take sex and babies and separate them utterly, you're going to have chaos. And here we are 50 years later with lots and lots of chaos. Where do you place it?
I would say that's kind of the peak moment, but there was so much more that led up to that. I mean, the fact that you can actually get to that point means that there was all this crumbling that was going on before that. And I even look at the First and Second World Wars, and I think it's something like 37 million men largely were killed in the First World War. It's something like 85 million men and women in the Second World War, because of course and in both cases you had these epidemics that exploded and just killed people by the millions. And you also have this sort of sense of, let's eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow we may be dead. A country like Poland, where one-fifth of their population has been just killed off. Not to mention, of course, the huge swaths of people, the Jews that were killed, millions and millions of them. So I think what happened with that was really the psychic breaking of the culture, and which is why it took a generation, but you can see this real crumbling in the 1960s. That was as a result of these wars and a result of that kind of destruction and the psychological damage that was done, especially when you think about all those men that were killed, that families never got their sons or fathers, brothers back. It's huge.
Maybe that's another tie-in with the message of Fatima. Russia will spread her errors, and if my message is not heeded, another war will accrue. So you've got war literally in terms of battlefields and tanks and bullets, but then there's the war in the relationship between men and women. And war is very psychically disruptive. It brings out the very worst, most animalistic tendencies in men, hence the rise of prostitution in otherwise, regular, normal towns in Europe and in Canada. I remember my hometown of Halifax during World War I was rum and rebellion and prostitution. They wanted to quote service the men who were doing such a great job for us, and so sexual morality went out the window quickly, because maybe it was you mentioned the woman walking into an abortion clinic, like let's say Rose McGowan, who thinks she's going to be happy by doing this. We think we're supporting the troops by sending them porn, but really we're making them more animalistic.
Yeah, no, and that's an incredible point, I think, because that is driving that wedge between men and women, which is fueling all of this angst towards them. And that's Mallory Millett made it clear too that this was one of the things that the feminists thought they were going to solve by we see this very clearly today. If women just rule the world, things would be much better. We wouldn't have all of these wars. So I think that kernel of an idea, that lie, that we can get rid of war if women are in charge of everything, is another huge motivating factor. And I think the other piece that we haven't touched on is, of course, just even the fact that within Protestantism, there's not really a place for women, a healthy place for them to live out their lives as spiritual mothers. There's certainly no convents. There's not, this religious avenue through.
There's no celibacy period in Protestantism, almost zero.
Yeah. So I think in light of that, women are reacting to that as well on a spiritual level of, we don't have any kind of home here. And I think that's another major force that was sort of pushing along this agenda of feminism as well. So there's all these interesting bits that fit together.
I love that unspoken, unchallenged dicta, this little dogmatic thing that if women ran the world, everything would be Skittles and beer. And you think about the women who've led their countries to war, Indira Gandhi, Golda Meir, Margaret Thatcher, right? She wasn't the Nerf lady.
Right.
She was the Iron Lady.
Yeah, that's for sure. No, and I think that's just it too. Is that, like you were talking about mentioning earlier? Women have a great struggle in terms of it's hardwired into us in terms of envy and jealousy. And, one friend of mine that works for a major government agency would talk about how the older women had all this envy towards the younger women that were the new recruits that were coming in, because they realized they had been at that stage. They were the young, new women that got all the attention. And now that they're, aged out, they're 20 years older, they're not getting all the attention from their colleagues like they used to. And so and actually there's a great statistic, something like 40% of women will not help someone who's beneath them unless there's some kind of quid pro quo.
Right.
I think in light of that, we're not great mentors. We're not great at sort of coalition building. It can be done, but often it's really done more for power's sake to keep ourselves on top instead. Yeah. So we need men, actually, I think, to kind of help balance ourselves out in those weaknesses.
I think you see this in these vagina hat rallies, where, and they're almost always, they glom onto a big pro-family, pro-life event. This happens all the time with the March for Life in Washington. It happened in Los Angeles. It happened in San Francisco. You have tens of thousands, and sometimes hundreds of thousands if you're talking about the March for Life, young people, fresh-faced, smiling, the majority under 30. And why are they marching? They're marching on behalf of someone else.
Right.
But the next day with the Planned Parenthood Pink Brigade, they're marching for themselves, and they're filled with anger. So angry.
Yeah. And I think that's, just one of the saddest things is that the reality is we just cannot get the march covered. I mean, we know why, because it, like you said, it's fresh-faced, young, happy, lovely people. And then it is contrast. And it's interesting to even watch how the demise of that, I mean, that march this year was really a bust for many obvious reasons. But again, it's that infighting that's happening among the leadership there, all women who are, disagreeing about some pretty hefty issues. It's, at least it's imploding, but you're right. It is that balance of here's the good and here's the evil.
Can you believe how gay everything is now? It's just everywhere.
It really
I call
is
it
everywhere.
Big gay.
It's a good name for it. Yeah, it really is. It's exploded.
That's all post.
And trans
post
too.
Trans.
The other.
Well, that's the next frontier.
Yeah.
Yeah. No one believes me, but I think now that they have Obergefell Hodges, now that big gay has dominated everywhere, they've moved on to the trans thing and the pronoun wars, and the next after that. See, now we're into sex with robots. There's the robot brothels now, and what is a robot but a surrogate corpse? I think the terminus here is the normalization of things like necrophilia, which is the fact that I even have to say the sentence is
horrifying.
High in the ick factor. But I think that's the trend. It's the ultimate participation in the death principle, which was begun in contraception.
Yeah, well, and I think there's a lot of overlapping patterns between what you call big gay and the feminist movement in terms of just this capacity to bully with the emotions and then flip it quickly to becoming a victim. Or even see when journalists use this. Jim Acosta apparently has some new book coming out about how he's such a victim. So it's certainly not limited to women, but it's highly effective. And, women know this. I mean, I remember being in high school and thinking, okay, if I get pulled over, I'll just start crying, for speeding. Just that natural, I'll get let off if I'm crying, because men don't know how to deal with tears. And so, I'm going
to try that. I'm going to bring some onions, chop them up.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah.
It probably would backfire. The cop would get mad. Be a man. Here, I'm going to charge you double.
And besides, you stink. Yeah. I think that this is really a part of the pattern, and we're seeing this within this LGBT movement as well, very, very much in spades. This kind of demolition through, emotions. It's pretty striking, this pattern.
I just saw a movie poster, and I think it's she's the super uber thin Keira Knightley. I think it's called Colette, and she's looking very self-righteous. It's just this oversized picture of her, daring the camera to disagree with her wisdom. And then you think there's a new crop of feminist movie characters. One has helped I think, destroy the Star Wars franchise, and that's the second to latest Star Wars with the young fighter girl. A lot of these movies and animated games feature a kick butt girl who's not gonna take it from the man. Right. Lara Croft, Atomic Blonde. You notice this crop of ultra-violent women that have to kind of mimic.
No, absolutely. Yeah, and that's the trend. That's the we hate men, but we're going to be just exactly like you. That kind of struggle that feminism has. So I think it is definitely there, and really tragic that we've gotten to that point. That's really how we have to express. The only avenue really that we have to express our femininity in the culture is through that, or through dripping sensuality, or both, actually.
Right, and you kind of play with this idea of the evangelical power of beauty in the Marian option. Talk a little bit about why beauty has an arresting quality. If you look at, go to Europe, I don't care if you're a hardcore trans, lesbian, pro-abortion activist. If you want to be an artist, every art school is going to include a trip to Europe where you see the great works of art. And the most painted woman in history is the Blessed Virgin Mary. She's still the exemplar of beauty.
Well, I think there's several reasons, but the fundamental reason is because beauty, of course, is an expression of God's beauty. It's one of those things that's supposed to ooze through us, that it's communicated to us from God when we're healthy, ordered, holy human beings. And of course, Our Lady is the pinnacle of that. She's all those things. So of course, she's going to be the most beautiful. And you always hear, I know when Our Lady of Fatima, when one of the children were trying to help figure out how to describe her and get, I think Lucia was helping get a statue made. And, no one's ever quite happy with it because it doesn't capture who she is. And that was one of the fun things, was just to see, again, without an exception, every person who had an apparition would say, she was the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. And St. Bernadette, actually, Subaru said, you would want to die just so that you can see her again. She's so beautiful. And that slakes something in this human soul, that we have this desire for beauty. We have a desire for order. And that's also why this trip to Europe is always required, because that's the places where they understood order, they understood proportion. And there was obviously, this great Catholic ethos. There was plenty of competition as well. But that's what fueled this constant desire to do better and more, and dive deeper into God's beauty, and that's how we get it. You're not going to find it, obviously, in the spirit of the anti-Mary.
Sure. Deft use of slake, by the way.
Thank you.
Great verb. There's a book by Philip Maynard called "To Slake a Thirst." It's the Matt Talbot way to sobriety. It's for people who are alcoholics or eat too much or love Coke too much and it's ruined their lives, for whom AA didn't work. To slake a thirst. Very, very good. I want to return to something you said earlier about people who walk into abortion clinics, people who exult in the evil they've done. and chapter 12 here is called Helping the Walking Wounded. Why is it important to recognize that when people do things like have abortions, they don't wake up in the morning and say, what kind of evil can I do? I know I can kill my baby. That they're, back to Aristotle, they are going toward an apparent good, an apparent cause of happiness. Well, that's a very loving way to approach them, isn't it? As a conversation starter, to get to the point of, why are you angry? Forget the political stuff and all the talking points. Let's go to the heart.
Right. No, I think that's a huge piece of this, is that there is something that all of us are struggling with. I recently had a conversation with a friend of mine who was struggling with some major issues. And finally, after talking through a lot of things, I finally got back to the fact that she was really struggling with a lot of things that happened in her childhood. There's molestation, there's family suicide, all kinds of issues that just hadn't ever been dealt with in a healthy way. And so, of course, there's going to be this trauma. And I think that's one of the things that we always all have to keep in mind, is there's so much trauma out there. I mean, even among these women who started feminism, that the trauma is just everywhere. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we have to be so compassionate, but also try and get down to that root wound, because otherwise it just is going to devolve into a political, food fight. You're not really going to get anywhere, because of the fact that the person's intellect is so colored by this brokenness and by these lies that have been inserted into their heads that they think are true. It takes a lot of compassion. I think a book like this hopefully will help a lot of men to sort of feel compassionate towards women, because frankly, I can see why would be a lot of resentment towards women in the way that men are treated by them. But for them to sort of understand that there really is this brokenhearted woman who all she really wants is to be loved, well known, do good, and be beautiful. It makes it easier to sort of start loving them. I think, even in those difficult situations.
I watched a one-man play once about St. Joseph a couple of years ago. And if I can remember, I'll put the show notes in. He's an actor from San Diego, and one of the figures that he performs as is St. Joseph, and he comes out. It's basically a soliloquy from the next life, in which he remembers his life on earth, and he turns toward why he died before Christ died. And it was so moving. I can still see him. I can still hear the way he got it across. Because I never pondered this. I mean, it's a very strong small T tradition that St. Joseph died before Our Lady, before her son. And his name is Mark. It's going to come to me. He said, I was disappointed, and then I was hurt, and then I was angry. I'm paraphrasing why he had to go before Jesus did. And then he realized, if God the Father permitted Jesus to be arrested in front of me, it would not have gone well. It would not have let them do it. But Our Lady did watch her son be tortured and so wounded and then murdered, and how tempting it would have been for her to resent the men, right? There are no female centurions.
Right.
But she let the full range of emotions come up and fully express them without it turning into revenge. That seems to be important when you're talking about trauma and the witnessing of evils done.
Well, and even his disciples, I mean, she could have had a lot of resentment towards them.
Right.
Like, where were you?
Hey, good job, guys. Right.
Exactly. And yet that aspect of who Our Lady is, that sort of victimhood element, is never played up. And yet it's not even just a matter of forgiveness. It's then turns on its head and says, you're the mother of all these people who have just betrayed you, that Christ gives us that gift. So it's a pretty phenomenal thing to think about who she is in the context of all of that, what she saw him go through, and then that she's supposed to love all of us, even though we're the ones that put him up there.
I can see this anti-Mary exposed thing becoming a movement, like the John Doe clubs from the Frank Capra movie. Because apart from, maybe we can close this way, apart from writing books, which you've done an exceptional job in, how can the average woman or the average man recognize what toxic femininity is and live out the answer to it, which is not the other extreme? You talk about the golden mean, right? It's Christian life lived out to its full as men and as women, without the errors of the either extreme.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great question. There's the micro level, which of course, every individual, we're all called to live out the will of God. And especially if you want to see some amazing women, look at all these women saints throughout history: Joan of Arc, St. Catherine of Siena, St. Helen, St. Monica, St. Lucy, St. Cecilia. The list goes on and on. Not one of them was milquetoast. Not one of them was boring and lacked any kind of personality. And yet, look at the amazing good that they did. I mean, compare the good of someone like St. Catherine of Siena to the elite women that are running the show in Washington right now. And it's just laughable, the contrast. And yet, they knew fundamentally that the real core of that was to follow God's will. That's where the fruit is. So would be certainly the first thing, is to understand that, to recognize that there is this anti-Marian spirit, and then to recognize the opposite of that. The real antidote is to live out the will of God. But beyond that, I think, one of the things, I've just seen this hole that we could sort of drive a Mack truck through, in terms of the cultural pieces. Obviously, you live in Hollywood, and you're seeing a lot more kind of boots on the ground. What's happening, Unplanned is coming out, and they're getting some traction in different ways. But
if I can press pause there, I just did a coffin report on Unplanned. I know Abby Johnson. I know her attorney. I'm probably going to interview the director. It got the Passion of the Christ treatment, slap with rated R. Which I think it's going to backfire. I think that's going to send a lot more traffic to it, because it's just so obvious what they're trying to do.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And that's what we have to deal with over and over and over again. But, I look at even something like magazines. Why have we not pulled millions of dollars together and bought one magazine that could be at the checkout stand, in the grocery store or at the airports? I mean, these are things that women flip through all the time, and it's just kind of visual candy for us, and we love it. But we have to, as Catholic women, be really selective about what we're buying. And there's not one that I could buy that I, am convinced, or I know that there's something in it that won't offend me. Why can we not have one magazine like that? And I think Joanna Gaines has been a perfect example of the hunger that women have for wholesome, edifying, beautiful work.
It's an excellent example. This is her husband, Chip, right? Chip Gaines. What's the show? They're from Waco, Texas. What's the...
Fixer Upper.
Yeah. Fixer Upper, right. My daughters are complete addicts.
Yeah. No, it's a great show. But I think that's the point. I mean, even she's a perfect example, because she's not patronizing to her husband. She's not condescending to him. They have a beautiful relationship, 5 kids. I mean, there's a lot to like there. But, why can't we do that? We have the church is the greatest promoter of art in all of history, and we can't come up with a magazine that would be beautiful for women, that would be compelling for women. So anyway, I think that there's a lot of holes like that, that we could be filling in different ways. I mean, obviously politics is important, but the fact that we're losing so many young women at college and in these places where they're just infected by toxic femininity tells us that we've got to start doing something different to reach them in different ways.
I think that slaking this hunger for all of this is so important, Kerry. I was thinking about movies. You were talking about, why can't we pony up support for a magazine that's an alternative to all the schlock and dreck? Same with movies. You talk about Hollywood. My Hollywood friends say this constantly. Deep-pocketed people who have a Christian worldview they just think of it as a big money pit, whereas they go to movies every week. And then you have movies that are completely secular in origin and creation that are loved by Catholics. For instance, Babette's Feast. Have you seen Babette's Feast?
I have seen Babette's Feast, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and it's there's nothing new. I mean, can we not make a new Babette's Feast that's not an awkward translation? And it's amazing.
Well, she would have to be a disabled lesbian of color who kills everybody at the end. Yeah, Babette's Blood Feast. No, I'm sorry you had to hear that. What's the shortest distance between our viewers and listeners and you? KerryGress.com?
KerryGress.com. And then I have started a magazine. Actually, I started it kind of as all of this sort of developed with our mutual friend, Noelle Mering, called Helena Daily. And it's an aggregate site for Catholic women's content, but we also do secular content that doesn't have any garbage in it. Because women like stuff. We like candles. We like silverware. We like napkins. We like decorating our homes. And, all these things are not inimical to our faith, but are actually really important.
You like
terms
sharp pleats.
Not so much, actually. I'm really bad at ironing.
I'm an ironing addict. That's my my weakness. So because it'll give me a chance to mention the magazine again. So funny that I'm like, why can't we start a magazine? Patrick, I am starting a magazine. Helena Daily. How often does Helena Daily come out, Kerry?
Well, it comes out every day, but Helena Daily is. It's a good question. Helena Daily is obviously just tiny postcard, and but we've been really happy with it in terms of just trying to promote other women, trying to promote blogs, obscure blogs of Catholic women from around the world, but also filling that need that it's not going to be filled at the parish. People aren't going to start talking about gardening tips and recipes for Lent at the parish level. That shouldn't be part of the homily. And if it is, we have a problem. So,
but how about a group that meets on Thursday that the priest can mention in the announcements?
Sure, you can do that. But most of us don't have time to go to that group on Thursday that the priest can mention. So it's much easier to have it on your phone to be able to flip through things that are going to help buttress your faith, but also just even your daily life, as far as, getting through the week and helping live the Catholic faith.
Amen. Well, your lips to God's ears. I want to send people to carriegress.com. It's CarrieGress.com. Also put the link to the Stella Maris candles that I'm sure smell beautiful, filled with beauty. And Christ is the light, so it all melds.
It all fits.
That lays to rest another episode of The Patrick Coffin Show. Thank you so much to Dr. Carrie Gress. I do want to mention this. Listen up. We're going to Catholic Germany, and you are coming with us. We're going to Regensburg, Munich, Dachau. We're going to cross the border into Austria and go to Salzburg, where The Sound of Music was filmed. And it all culminates with a live performance of the Oberammergau Passion Play. This is only done every decade, and it's going to happen in May 2020 from the 17th to the 25th. Go to patrickcoffin.media/pilgrimage, sign up, find out more information about the exact spots, churches, German food, German beer, monasteries, and our amazing spiritual director, Father Willie Raymond. He's a Holy Cross Father who is running the canonization cause of Father Patrick Peyton, who's now venerable, soon to be blessed, and he's the guy who came up with the phrase, the family that prays together stays together. So, sign up. This is already going. People are signing up hand over fist. And there's an early bird, which goes away at the end of April 30th. So one more time, go to patrickcoffin.media/pilgrimage, and I do hope to see you there. In the meantime, be a saint. What else is there? Hey, this is Patrick Coffin. If you like what you see and hear, and you want to see and hear more, consider joining Coffin Nation as a full member. Just click right here and find out more about what that means. Nipsey, my fedora. That's Coffin Nation, the world's largest online community of culture builders. Click right here. See you on the inside.